getting started, I'm going to invite you to join me in prayer as we seek God's guidance and illumination in our time together. So if you'll join me, please, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly God, we gather here today with hearts open to your guidance. We thank you for the gift of this gathering and for the opportunity to explore the path of synodality in our church. May your Holy Spirit inspire our minds and our hearts, guiding our discussion and reflections towards greater unity, collaboration, and service to one another. May we listen attentively to your voice in each other and in the world around us, so that we may walk together in faith, hope, and love. We ask for the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, our Mother, all the angels and saints, that this time together may deepen our understanding and commitment to your will. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. So thank you. It's become a new tradition, a regular tradition here at Oblate School of Theology's continuing ed events to acknowledge where we are, right? Our bodies and our spirit are in a context and a place. So it's important for us to acknowledge that the area we now call San Antonio is the ancestral lands of the numerous affiliated indigenous groups, bands, and clans collectively referred to today as the Coahuiltecan and Tonkawa peoples. We further acknowledge that the San Antonio River, the lifeblood of our community, as Yanaguana, spirit waters in Payaya, a language of these Tapilam Coahuiltecan nations. We honor their enduring presence in and connection to this land, which includes Yanaguana and the surrounding environment. Furthermore, we also recognize the 377 souls interred in the Oblate Cemetery with whom we share this campus. Their enduring presence on these grounds demonstrates the commitment and connection of the missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate to the communities of the faithful in Central and Southwest Texas. So we're gathered here for the Louis G. Vance Lecture in Systematic Theology. This is an annual event dedicated to advancing theological scholarship and dialogue. This experience invites distinguished scholars to address pressing topics in systematic theology, fostering critical reflection and exploration of contemporary issues within the church and broader society. It serves as a platform to engage students, theologians, and our community in meaningful theological discourse. This free and public lecture is possible only through the generosity of the Louis G. Vance family. The entire Vance family has long supported OST and the entire Oblate congregation. And while they were unfortunately unable to join us this evening, we still nonetheless recognize their continued encouragement and support that they generously share with us. We thank in particular Vivian, Paul, and Vanessa for all that they do for the missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate and for Oblate School of Theology. This year's keynote speaker is Dr. Massimo Faggioli. He's a full professor in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at Villanova University in Philadelphia. His books and articles have been published in more than 10 languages. He's a member of the steering committee for the project Vatican II Event and Mandate for a multi-volume intercontinental commentary on Vatican II. In 2023, he was elected to the Board of Editors of the International Journey of Theology Concilium. He was the founding co-chair of the unit Vatican II Studies for the American Academy of Religion between 2012 and 2017. He has a column in LaCroix International, and he's a contributing writer to Commonweal magazine and for the Italian magazine Il Regno. Among his recent publications are The Liminal Papacy of Pope Francis, Moving Towards a Global Catholicity in 2020, Joe Biden and Catholicism in the United States in 2021, the Oxford Handbook of Vatican II, co-edited with Catherine Clifford, Theology in Catholic Higher Education Beyond Our Identity Crisis, his most recent publication in 2024. Now, he's currently under contract with Oxford University Press for a book on the history of the Roman Curia. He lives in Philadelphia with his wife and their 2 children, And I think it's not saying too much to acknowledge that he is a prescient and insightful voice on the enduring experience of Vatican II, and critically, how synodality is emerging as a characteristic and living incarnation of being church in the world. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Faggioli to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's a great honor to be here at Oblate School of Theology. I've discovered in these last few years that my liaisons, my connections to the San Antonio area, to the San Antonio Catholic Church especially, are growing. People in San Antonio, people in the United States, people in other continents who are from San Antonio. So it's one more reason to be really happy to be here. Your welcome has been wonderful since yesterday here on campus. I'm also very happy to be here because this is a very particular moment in the life of our church, of our world, of our country, where theology, and especially Catholic theology, the Catholic Church, have something to say and to think about. And I will do this tonight by focusing on three different steps that are very connected one to the other. Global Catholicism, synodality, and what it means to do theology in a synodal Catholic global church. So here, the first step. In these last few years, we have heard more and more talking about global church, global Catholicism. And in some sense, I mean, Catholicism has always been global, has always been universal, because, I mean, Catholic, as you know, can be translated as universal. One of the most interesting and still influential essays written right at the end of the Second Vatican Council, at the end of 1965, was written by the German Jesuit theologian Karl Rahner, who said, Vatican II has opened a new era in the history of the church, which he called in German die Weltkirche, world church. What we see now is a step in that direction, but in a way that I'm not sure is exactly what Father Rahner had in mind, because there is a certain step from the world church to the global church, which I think has to do with demographic shifts. So the future of Catholicism is much more in the global south than in the northern hemisphere. Is certainly not in Europe, certainly not in Italy. So, but there are other shifts that we are starting to understand in a deeper way. And in some sense, it is absolutely true that Vatican II was the first council in church history, the first council of the global church. All bishops and theologians from all continents, 2,600 bishops at every session, more or less. If you compare with the Council of Trent, at the opening of the Council of Trent in 1545, there were 29 bishops. I mean, 29, 2,600. It's a little different. Okay, so but now we understand that this growth of Catholicism out of Europe, out of the Western world to the global, starts in some sense even before Vatican II. And it starts with Vatican I. And so Vatican I is when the papacy lost the papal states, which was a great blessing. If I had said that in 1870, I would have been excommunicated probably, But as Paul VI said 1 century after, in 1970, that was a blessing because it liberated the church from being tied to the government of a specific territory and so on. So there's a longer history that starts in the late 19th century of a Catholic Church, of a papacy that start leaving behind certain geographical, cultural roots that are Italian, European, and are more open to a global dimension. Certainly, that was part of the intuition of Pope John the 23rd when he called Vatican II in 1959. And every pope since then have interpreted, have translated in different ways this call of the church to be really universal, to be multicultural, multiracial, deeply aware of the incredibly complex dimension of this one human family that is now more interconnected. Certainly, this has taken a new shape or an acceleration with Pope Francis. So here with Pope Francis, my main thesis about Pope Francis is not that he's a liberal, that he's institutional or not, but I think the major point about Pope Francis is that he's the Pope who has accelerated incredibly this opening of Catholicism to its global dimension. That could happen only with a Pope coming not from Europe, not from the Mediterranean, from a Jesuit of a particular kind, even if one might say that all Jesuits are of a particular kind. But so we have seen with Pope Francis in these last 12 years a very intense move for a church going out of the chancery, going forth, Ecclesia in Salida, which means something geographical, but it means something else for those who live and practice and work for the church. It means a Catholic Church where the conceptual and the practical are in a different relationship, where the communal or the existential, the lived dimension, have a different relationship with the structural, with the intellectualized ideal type of an institution. With Pope Francis, we have seen also how complicated global Catholicism is, because global Catholicism means Catholic cultures, and Catholics encountering cultures, more encounter, more exchange. It means also more disruption, more moments or long periods of uncertainties, of instability. That is really part of the, entering into this global dimension of Catholicism, where there's not one overarching, overpowering matrix that can be the Italian model or the German model or the French model, and even less the North American model. So here, as Pope Francis put it in one of the key paragraphs of the exhortation that he wrote shortly after the synod for the Amazon region of October 2019 in Querida Amazonia, he wrote about this synodal church in a global dimension. He wrote that this church is, quote, encounter and engagement, contemplation and service, receptive solitude and life in community, cheerful sobriety and struggle for justice, end quote. So and this is really typical of Pope Francis, this way of polarity in tension. So a polarity that works only if these two different elements are kept in tension, not if we want to solve that problem, but it's a problem whose only solution is in not solving it. It's in keeping these things together. So this is really part of what global Catholicism looks like to us now, where you have apparently contradictory directives coming from Rome, for example, on the blessing for same-sex couples that in some continents have been rejected and in some continents are taken for granted as obvious, right? It's only one example. So we are now entering in really the church of the third millennium. This is more than just another year, another decade, another century. I think this global dimension of the church is really how we are entering the third millennium, which means no longer the church of the first millennium, no longer the church of the second millennium, a hierarchy, an imperial papacy, and so on, and not even the church of the early post-Vatican II period. So we are still in the post-Vatican II church, but it has already become something different from the post-Vatican church in which I grew up, in which I studied as a young scholar, as a doctoral student. It's a different post-Vatican II church because we are in the post-Vatican II church of the third millennium, which looks very different from what the late second millennium was, the 1960s or the 1970s. And so this is my first step. So we are now in something global Catholicism, which is also from a scholarly point of view, something kind of new, because in these last 20 years, when there was something about global and then religion attached, it was usually about global Protestantism, because Catholicism was supposed that it was always global. And so what's new about that? So I think that was a mistake. And so I think that we are now seeing that there's some specificities of this global dimension of the Catholic Church. Second step, synodality. So I think that the synodal process of Pope Francis and synodality as a concept that has been rescued by Pope Francis, I should say rescued from the hands of theologians. I mean, he has received that, and he has made a theological concept that was used mostly as a very specialized jargon in the ecclesial vocabulary, which is something that doesn't happen often or easily. And by doing that, Pope Francis has also given new life to the institution of the Synod, which is one of the Vatican II institutions. This is really important to see that as Pope Francis' way to make sense and try to give an interpretive key to the third millennium, to the global church of the third millennium, as you remember in the famous first important speech he gave on synodality of October the 17th, 2015, during the Synod on the Family. He said, synodality is what God expects from the church in the third millennium. So he really used that lens directly. He called the synodal process a few years after giving new life to the synods in 2014, starting 2014, but he called the synodal process in 2021 as a response to a series of global crises. I mean, crises that we thought that in Catholicism were limited to a certain kind of particular area, but it was evident to many people more and more that they were actually global crises. The abuse crisis in the Catholic Church, at the beginning, as you remember, that's an American problem or that's an Irish problem. In 2018, 2019, it becomes clear that it's not clearly a problem only of one area. The issue, the discussion on the role of women in the church, it's no longer a Western problem. It's no longer a problem of developed countries, but it's a Catholic problem. And in general, it was Pope Francis' way to recall, in some sense, Vatican II. The synodal process is as close as we could get to Vatican III, something like Vatican III, whose possibilities of being called ever in the next few decades or centuries are very uncertain, because it would be incredibly complicated, if not impossible, to call today a council called Vatican III under the same rules of Vatican II. And we can go into this in the Q&A if you want. So here, like a Jesuit French theologian, Christophe Theobald, said, he said that the synodal process was basically Vatican III without a name. And so he wrote an interesting book 2 years ago, which is the best interpretation, I think, of synodality, as something that tries to extend Vatican II beyond its limits and to apply Vatican II in a very different situation of today, also with a different method of discussion, both locally and at the central level, at the Synod of Bishops. The name itself is not clear if we have to call it the Synod or Synod of Bishops. That tells you something, right, on where we are. So here, Vatican II and the councils before Vatican I and Trent, it was basically a Senate or parliamentary model where there are commissions, they draft texts, there are speeches in favor, against, amendments, and so on. And this is not how synodality works. This is not how the Synod on synodality has worked. The Senate model has been put aside by Pope Francis, and the way in which synodality has made the whole church exercise, like sending all of us to the gym, that's been basically the thing, was a method that was more practical, less dominated by specialists, where actually specialists were told, now you shut up, rooted in a methodology of small groups, of circle, infused with spiritual moments, with silence, and the discernment. Okay. This has worked so far. We are still trying to understand a few things for how a synodal church should work. For example, what is the role of the monarchical office in a synodal church? What is the role of the bishop in a truly synodal church? So we have some ideas, okay, but it will take a long time to go through that. What is the role of the papacy in a synodal church? It cannot be exactly the same that it was before. Ultimately, what is the role of theology in a synodal church? In a synod, what is the role of theology? Where theologians for centuries had a major part in shaping the conversation, in shaping the positions, the thesis, This is not what we have seen at the Synod on Synodality in 2023 and 2024. It has been one of the ways in which Pope Francis has explained to us what it means to be a church as a field hospital, which is, I think, the most powerful metaphor that he has used for the church. I mean, a church that takes care of the existential emergencies of the members of the human family and of creation more than anything else. But it's a first step, okay? And so this is something on synodality, which is, as I said, is Pope Francis' way to open Catholicism to a global Catholicity. So we tend to, identify Catholicism with a certain culture that might have worked until a certain point in church history. Today, it's no longer working. I say this as an Italian who came to this country in 2008, and up to the young age of 37 was never told by any of his mentors, you should read something of feminist theology, for example. America saved me from that terrifying ignorance. But Italy has been the marker of a certain Catholic culture for centuries. Thank God it's no longer the case, right? So, but that is very complicated, okay? Third step, what all that means for the role of theology. What is the job of theology? What is theology supposed to do, and how it's supposed to change in a synodal, global Catholic Church? That's what I've been working in these last couple of years. And this is something that has opened my eyes, again, thanks to my migration from Italy to the United States, but also because, American Catholicism has and should keep this great gift of being a church that can open you really to a global dimension, much more than in European Catholicism can. It has opened my eyes, my experience, my contact to especially Latin America, especially Australia and Asia. So here, I think for a number of reasons that have to do with the demographic cliff and identity politics and so on, we can surely say that the future of Catholic education, Catholic culture, is already in a difficult situation. And some might say, well, we have already all these problems, these unknowns, challenges. Why synodality right now to complicate the situation even more? I think that it's the opposite, that to embrace a synodal church can help us understand how to get out of a certain identity crisis, which is common to all Catholic institutions around the world, but I would say even more in those countries where education has become integral part of a certain market system, has become very expensive, has become really driven by a certain kind of demands of the job market, and of a certain ideology of what being human is about, of what being a person is about, and what life is about, basically. So here, we have seen in these last few centuries a mutation of the very idea of universities. Especially in this country, universities or higher education was built, especially non-Catholic schools, as places for the formation of ministers. And now they have become in many cases, places for the formation of a different kind of clergy, which is the clergy of those who have an MBA. It's a different kind of religion, and theology has become, I think, largely indifferent to this genetic mutation of what education is about. This has become an even bigger problem, I think, within Catholicism, where in these last, I would say, 40 years, 50, academic theologians, so those who are in charge or think they are in charge of the thinking of the church, and the Catholic community have become sometimes too much separate, or sometimes two separate worlds that have a lot of difficulty talking to each other, and in some cases have lost interest in talking to one another. So this is rooted in a very long history, especially after the 1970s, after Humane Vitae, because of the abortion question. It's a separation that comes of a painful history of mutual excommunications, and of a lack of recognition of the different roles, but it is also based on, I think, missing a huge element, which is this, that theological thinking has kept thinking about itself in terms of the freedom from ecclesiastical authority, as if we are still living in Christendom, as if we are still living in the 19th century or the early 20th century. Well, actually, we are living in a system of diaspora, of Christianity, of Catholicism, of Christianity, of religion. We are in a diasporic situation, and synodality is incredibly important because it calls our attention to the world, to the real world in which we live, which is a world where either we want to be in dialogue and evangelize, both things together, but dialogue without evangelization or evangelization without dialogue, it doesn't quite work, I think. And so here synodality, which is about participation, mission, evangelization, is also a call to reconsider what are the relationship that we should have or we should imagine today between theology, the church, and society. So these three entities, which right now, all of them are under redefinition, but this is a call also to reconsider how much is this quest for freedom of theological thinking, of thought, freedom of thought, how much is that endangered by the church, by the bishops, and how much is endangered by other entities that we are less used to see as a threat for the freedom of the church, for the freedom of theology. So here, I believe we are in many countries now in a form of new paganism. With all due respect to pagans, but I mean, what I see sometimes in the way our brothers and sisters who are migrants, who are prisoners, convicts, they are treated, it reminds me of a certain neo-pagan culture of human sacrifice, and we have something to say about this, and theology has to say something. I believe for a renewed ecclesial mission of theology. This is my whole point of the book that I published a few months ago, that theology has to rediscover its ecclesial dimension, which doesn't mean becoming the megaphone of the bishops of the Vatican, but also leaving behind the idea that on every single issue, theologians have to be the opposition party of the Vatican, of the bishop. There's something to be reconsidered that. So this means that we have to find a new balance between different dimensions of doing theology. So, I mean, doing theology means every one of us, not just people who have a chair or something. All those who teach catechism, all those who are really active members of it, all of us are theologians by default, by virtue of our baptism, in different ways. So here, different dimensions have to be kept in a balance that is a little different in a synodal and global church. For example, in this neo-pagan, diasporic, secular world, what is the right balance between transgression and transmission of the faith? How much should be about deconstruction of transmitted ideas that are outmoded, that are old-fashioned, and so on, and how much should be reconstruction? How much should be a critical exercise of the tradition, and how much should be rebuilding a new tradition? How much should be theoretical, and how much should be experiential? I have no particular answer. I cannot give you here percentages. I mean, so 80% of this, 20% of this. This is, I don't have time tonight, and I really don't have those percentages. But these are questions that I believe are central for the future of Catholicism, and for all those who want to understand, I think that we are in a really different moment compared not just to the first millennium, to the second millennium, to the Council of Trent, to the 19th century, but also different from the kind of world that we had imagined at the time of Vatican II the 21st century would be. So this is really, I believe we are really living in this country, in this world, a real time of crisis, but it's also a time of truth, of facing some truths that for a long time we have been too complacent to look in the eye and see how much this, I mean, requires a rethinking of some of our practices, of some of our of our expectations of the church and of ourselves personally, of what to do for this church, for our church, in every mission we are, in every ministry we are. So I am very grateful again for this invitation, because it gave me the opportunity to think a bit more clearly about this. And I thank you for your patience, and I'm very looking forward to your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Faggioli. I'll invite you to stay at the podium for a moment. And as we've begun to maintain this practice, we'll do so again today, and that is just taking a moment of silent reflection to internalize what we've received, consider the fruit that's emerging for us from Dr. Faggioli's lecture this evening, and also to consider what questions are emerging that we might like to pose in the next few minutes. So let's take a moment of quiet reflection. Thank you. So we'll now invite questions from both our in-person and online audience. For those of you online, please put any questions you may have into the Zoom chat, and Emmett will communicate those to me. For those of you in person, if you have any questions, simply raise your hand. I'll come to you with the microphone, and you can pose those questions to Dr. Faggioli.
Doctor, it sounds like the future invites many people of different status in the church to have a voice. The word discipline comes to mind. What would you envisage as the role of the Pope as the centre of unity in this third millennium?
Yes, so that's an excellent question. I mean, last week I sent a long article to a German journal who asked me to write about this. It's a question that we are exploring in the sense that we don't know. So we know how Pope Francis handled the synods in ways that are a mix of the tradition. So you speak, I make a synthesis, I decide, but in this last synod, we have seen something different. So he accepted in his own magisterium different law. So it's something that we started talking about with John Paul II in 1995 with his encyclical, his ecumenical encyclical, inviting everyone, I mean, starting with himself, to rethink the role of the papacy. Right. And so this is part of a long transition that starts at Vatican I, 1870, after the infallibility. Paradoxically, declaration of infallibility starts reducing the role of the Pope. Right. It's one of those interesting things. So we don't know. Clearly, the big challenge is to keep together the three dimensions: the monarchical, the collegial, the Bishop Conference, for example, and the synodal, right? So I don't think that everything will be decided synodally. Human nature doesn't allow for this kind of optimism. Okay, but certainly it will be different from what we have seen so far, and the biggest question is what to learn from other traditions that have tried something, the Orthodox Church, the Anglican Church, and so on. It's really a building site, not just in practice, but also, I mean, ecclesiologically, theologically. And this is one of those questions that I have seen that, so there's reluctance or there's caution to address that issue. Actually, because, as you know, in the Catholic Church, usually it's the Pope who says what the Pope can do, right? And so we are not there still, yet, but we are, addressing this thing in cautious ways, which is a sign of wisdom, I would say.
We have a question from the online audience, and then I'll return to some of our questions in-house here. Mark asks, can you elaborate on your comment that it would be difficult, if not impossible, to have a Vatican III according to the same rules as Vatican II?
Okay, so canon law says that all bishops have a right to be a member in the council of the Catholic Church. Now we have twice as many bishops that we had at Vatican II, first. Second, I don't know how wise it would be for having the most important body, legislative body in the Catholic Church deciding without any women, right? So it's not clear if a future council is in the cards, right? And so this is one of the other taboo questions that not many people want to write about, but it's there because a much bigger church means that some things are logistically very, so here the synod, so this development of the continental levels could be a hint of where we go, but Vatican II might have been the last in the list of the ecumenical councils. We don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a visitor here to the Oblate School of Theology, and I'm very impressed with the education and the effort of the staff and all the teachers to form people in a spirit of synodality in a church of the present. But it also speaks to me that in this country, all the studies and the experience of many people is the majority of our seminarians in theology and of young priests tend to yearn for a church of the past, more hierarchical, more authoritarian, more in-house, in church and devotion instead of out there on the fringes. And I have sensed that in other countries, where there's a great divide between some of the people in ministry who are now gray-haired and many of the, especially men, coming out of seminaries. Is it possible to have a church of synodality here and in the world with the current attitudes and experience and learning of many of our younger priests, often supported by many of the bishops of this country and elsewhere? What's the possibilities of synodality without having that group called the clergy?
Okay, so that was not a softball question, but so I'd say do two things. First is that if the entire church turns synodal, there's no elite of clergy that can stop that easily. I mean, it can be done, and it has been tried in some places, I think. But so there are some forces that are too big to resist. So here, I'm not saying that we should, build a movement that fights against the. I'm not advocating this. But there is something that's happening. So whether you are a priest of a certain orientation or another, you cannot deny that there's a big cultural question about the role of women in the Catholic Church. So, in the early centuries, women joined the church because it was an act of emancipation. Right now, it looks the opposite. This is a cultural tragedy and spiritual, by the way. So we need to find a way to solve that, incredible ways that are sustainable and so on. Second, I think that this is a larger conversation that we have with others in other in our communities, right? So with the clergy, with those who don't vote in the same way we vote, and so on. Okay. So these things will never be solved with a one-off conversation. The biggest problem I see as an academic theologian and academic theologians are seen by many rectors of seminaries as the last possible person they want to see on their campus. And I can understand why. I can understand why. So what needs to happen is that all of us, me, a Vatican II theologian, and a priest who thinks the Latin Mass is the most Catholic thing that there is, we need to share more experiential moments together. He and I need to tell each other that we love the same church, that we have similar concerns about how we're staying human, about, so it needs to happen. So what has happened within Catholicism has happened in our society, that we have started living in different universes. And in the Catholic Church, this is particularly tragic because it breaks down the sacramental communion that there is. So, I mean, one of the successes that I had in my personal, I mean, in my professional life was that in these last few years, I mean, I don't know if that's any, I mean, encouragement to you, but they started inviting me to speak in some seminaries, which hadn't happened in 15 years, right? So I didn't change anything in my writing, in my scholarship. I didn't, but so there's something happening there. And so this is a very long process. Final thing, I believe that there is a very specific thing happening in US Catholicism. It's a very particular situation, a very particular national identity crisis. I think this is even more than a political crisis. This is a spiritual crisis of who we are, of what kind of God we think there is, what kind of messianism we think is a Messiah, so what kind of salvation, right? So it's not always as sharp, the division between young clergy in every country, but you're right, there is a certain sense of a lack of solid ground socially, and so we need to go for the strongest possible thing, right? And I tell some of my students, well, I mean, Latin, you think Latin was the most Catholic thing, but I mean, those who killed Jesus was the Romans. I mean, they spoke Latin. I mean, it's not, right? I mean, some cultural symbols have become completely alienated from their history. I mean, so it takes time and it takes human relationship. It will never happen because of something I write or that even the Pope writes. It has to be a human communion. And I've seen this with some of my students. After 3 months in the same classroom, this connection happens. And so they still go to the Latin Mass, but they say, yes, Vatican II is my church. It's a huge success. So, but it takes time. And that's what we have to do, I think.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, Dr. Faggioli, as we look at the growth of the nuns in Europe, practice falling, North America, practice falling, do you see within this movement to the Southern Hemisphere seeds of the future for a spirituality that's contained, has been in the past, contained largely within an institution, a corporation, and I think that's what the nuns are kind of representing. I want to be spiritual, but I'm not interested in that veneer. Do you have a sense of what that future looks like from what we're seeing sociologically in that movement?
Sure. So I think that we really need, and coming to your point, we need to make clear that the church is not a corporation, okay, but it's very important because it helps us keep some institutions that are not necessarily corporations, right? And so institutions like deciding that living your life alone is not the only possible chance, right? So institutions like education, so here, I think that what's happening is that so there is this shift to the global south and so on. It means that a much larger percentage of Catholics in ministry are non-European, non-white, and so on. This is a big change. Now, I think that the third millennium is telling us, and this is important for religion in general, that we are exhausted by the promise of consumerism that is the response to our human quest for meaning. So this is a very dangerous moment in global history, I think, but there's also something that tells me, well, we might have reached that point when people say, well, all those promises, yes, I mean, painless dentistry, very good. Having the fifth phone in 5 years, maybe not so good, right? So, I think there's a huge opportunity to make a case, not for people to come back rank and file but saying, with all the faults of the church and of every institution that's made of human beings, we have something to offer that you cannot buy on Amazon, that you cannot have delivered to your doorstep without stepping out ever, right? So there is, I mean, I think there is a sense of we have reached a certain limit. Okay, so I don't know what that means. I mean, I was very much, shocked by the numbers of the adults who in these last few years have been baptized in France. Is the highest number ever in a European country in modern times. So I don't know for how long they stay in the church. I hope forever. Okay, so we don't know yet. Okay? But there's a certain moment of reaction that makes me think that that leaving the church to some people no longer delivers what they thought it would deliver. Right? So that leaving the church will solve all my problems. Well, maybe, but right? So we are dealing with massive changes in who is in charge of the leadership of the church. If you just look at the Vatican, the cardinals who are the prefects of the dicasteries of the Vatican, I mean, if you look at those faces, and those were there 15, 20 years ago, it's very different. Very different. So now it's really a global Vatican. And so a few things are trickling down, right? It's a very ebullient moment. Clearly, we're not going back to a church dominated by Europe or by Italy or by France. So that's it's in the past, I think.
Thank you. We have another in person.
Dr. Faggioli, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation this evening. I spent many years on the staff of the Association of Theological Schools in the U.S. and Canada. That's the umbrella accrediting agency for Catholic, Protestant seminaries, Orthodox schools in both countries. And my wonderful colleague on that staff was Dr. Dan Aylshire, a devout Baptist. But Dan loved working with Catholics on the accrediting process. And he said something very important to me, which resonates with your points this evening about the role of the theologian in the church. Dan said that what's characteristic of Catholic theology from his Baptist perspective was this. He says Catholic theology is formational theology. And what he meant by that was that the genius of Catholic theology is that it includes everything about the human person. It's social, it's integral, it's holistic, it's the mind and the heart. And he thought that was a brilliant hallmark, I think, of Catholic theology. So hearing you tonight speak about maybe recovering a more ecclesial mission, maybe for the theologian in the church, that strikes me as being a very powerful way for theologians to connect their expertise to the real needs, the lived needs of the church. And a second point that came up in our lives in the accrediting world was a great debate about what is a good theological school. And again, it's a theological question because one model is the model that we inherited from the University of Berlin, which was Wissenschaft, science, theology imagined as another discipline like chemistry or physics, but it has its own internal language. And then the alternative model was the model of paideia, or wisdom. And so I think it's that dialectic wisdom, care for the church, role of the theologian. So wandering Irishman talking at you this evening, but how does that strike you in terms of your understanding of the role of the theologian in the church?
I mean, many things I could say here, but the most delicate thing of what you have mentioned is how to incorporate within the Catholic theological system the dimension of the heart, of the wisdom, of the spiritual element, of the human formation of the theologian. I mean, we make ironies on the fact that human formation of priests comes up in an official document of the church in 1992. It's funny in its own way, right? But I mean, Catholic theological formation hasn't come up with that yet. Okay, so I mean, how do you measure that? I mean, who's in charge of measuring the spiritual wisdom of those who have to teach theology? I would be very afraid of appointing anyone doing this, right? And so this is I have no answer to that, but clearly there is a human element of those who teach theology that now is, I think, more crucial, because right now, I mean, some key questions are asked in the classroom, much less at home, much less in the parish. And so when they ask you, do you believe in the resurrection? You cannot say, well, there's this theory, there's the other theory. Well, I mean, you can do that, but in the end, what you have to say is, yes, I do believe that, or no, I don't believe, so I should change job completely, right? So that's a very much so I am very skeptical of juridical solutions to that. So there has to be a cultural conversion. And I'm one of those who, until 10 years ago, 15 years ago, wasn't thinking about these things, right? So there has to be a cultural conversion saying that we have to reimagine what it means to do theology, which is different from doing ministry and so on, but it can, if it's totally disconnected, it's usually bad theology, and it's not going to help my institution survive. So I mean, that's so here the biggest problem is how to keep in balance a very serious intellectual scholarly rigor at the same time accepting that being a good scholar is not enough. You can be a good scholar and a terrible theologian. Well, yes. I mean, that's true also for some physicians. I mean, you can know everything about the human body, but you can be a terrible doctor, right? It's similar. So I think we have broken a certain taboo, because what we see now in our classrooms is very different from what was in front of us just 1 or 2 decades ago. So this is coming from those who are in front of us. I mean, on top of all the other issues, I mean, the pressure from the donors, the alumni, are you teaching DI, this kind of thing, which is an incredible mess. But if we don't solve our own, it will be very hard to be credibly responding to the pressures from the outside, I think.
So I know that there are questions that we won't be able to get to this evening. I'm going to give you a last one from our online audience who are really pulling no punches. Under the circumstances you've described, what do you expect to happen when a new pope is elected? You can plead the fifth. So.
I know that I'm being recorded, so no. So I think that as every church historian knows, the conclave is never about this or that candidate, but it's about the agenda. What is the situation of the church now? What are we talking about here? And then you have the candidates. So I think that looking at the very composition of the College of Cardinals today, it's much bigger and much more global, much more diverse than it has ever been. But this is not a political construction by Pope Francis. It's not his gerrymandering. This is the Catholic Church. And so whoever is elected Pope, this is the church that he will lead. And there's no way to ignore that. So it might be a Pope who travels to Asia less frequently than Pope Francis, or more frequently, but it's a much more global church. And so we might see different options, but so there's no Pope that single-handedly can revert Catholicism to a European domain. It's not possible. So that's the best answer that I can give on the record.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking again Dr. Faggioli for a wonderful Vance lecture. All righty. So again, thank you, Dr. Faggioli, for this wonderful presentation this evening. I want to thank a few folks before we head for the exits. Father Lou Studer, the president of Oblate School of Theology, is here. It's part of his leadership to ensure, along with the man at whom I serve at the pleasure of, Father Thomas Klosterkamp, that we really embody the mission of Oblate School of Theology and of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, right? Our school's mission is to educate, form, and renew men and women to preach the gospel to the most abandoned. And that in itself might be a fundamental statement of a synodal church going into the future. So I appreciate their leadership and for their making events like this possible. Thank you both very much. She recently told me that she doesn't like a lot of eyes on her, so I'm going to defy her will and direct our appreciation and thanks to Veronica Montalvo, the program coordinator for the Department of Continuing Education. Thank you very much, Veronica, for all that you do. And Emmett, who is a much bigger fan of public praise, ran our tech for this evening. So thank you very much, Emmett Gonzalez, for running our tech this evening. Finally, of course, the Whitley Event Center facility staff set up and take down for every event that we hold here. Without them, these kinds of meetings could not be possible. So thank you to the Whitley Event Center. And lastly, I want to thank you all again for attending an event of Oblate School of Theology's continuing education. You are not only an incarnation of the mission of the school, but I think going forward we can understand that we are an incarnation of the synodal church. So let's go live that out in our lives. Thank you very much and have a safe drive home.